Welcome to Tuesday, December 9th, 2025. Your Day with the Podcast brought to you by the Advocates Injury Attorneys. If you've been injured in an accident, don't face it alone. Get an experienced local Wyoming attorney on your side. Free consultations at wyomingadvocates.com or call 307-800-1952. You deserve an advocate. Well, windy with more wind is the forecast for a lot of you here in the days ahead, as we are looking at very strong and very moist Pacific jet stream winds screaming across the region. So we're going to see a variety of weather. Some of you are going to be quite mild. Some of you are going to be quite cold. A lot of you are going to be windy. And the northern Rockies will see snow, with most of the central and southern Rockies staying dry. The Continental Divide, as we'll show you here in a moment, will play a big role in holding the cold air east of the Continental Divide through the rest of this week and into the weekend. We have a battle between the Pacific and the Arctic, and for a lot of you, the Pacific wins. For some of you, the Arctic wins, and for you in between, you get a little bit of both. We're going to see a significant pattern of occasional snow, off and on snow into Montana, parts of the Dakotas, and maybe getting into extreme northern Wyoming later this week and into the weekend, as the interaction with Pacific moisture and Arctic air will produce widespread snow there. But you get further south, the Pacific air just floods the zone, and that will keep you dry and mild and windy. And part of this is we have a pattern developing in the North Pacific, we call it a mega block, that is really setting up and is being very stubborn. And if it continues to hold, what it will do is it will deflect the coldest air, and there is a lot of extreme cold air, but it will be deflected more into the upper Midwest and the Great Lakes instead of the West until that omega block pattern breaks down. Some pretty shots of skyscapes across the region. There's some dark clouds heading around Lake Granby there into Colorado, and the satellite photo this morning really showing that fetch of Pacific moisture. We could technically call this an atmospheric river. I'll show you why here in a moment. A lot of Pacific moisture is getting pumped in to the northern Rockies. A lot of the blue and the green here is a lot of just high level wave clouds, especially right here. But as you get into the northern areas, the lower level moisture is deeper. And you can see that fetch in the precipitable water coming into the region. Now, a lot of this precipitable water, especially right here, is this in the form of a lot of high and mid-level clouds. But as you get closer to the colder air, it's going to be able to produce some snowfall. What we're showing you here is a graphic called the Integrated Vapor Transport, which is a tool used to identify atmospheric rivers. It's a combination of strong winds aloft and where the moisture is. And you can see it's taking direct aim into the Pacific Northwest and into the northern Rockies. That's why we have flood watches for the Pacific Northwest, very heavy coastal rains and inland to the west side of the Cascades. And then all of this brown, as we showed you yesterday, is for high wind warnings because of these strong jet stream winds. And then that moisture hits the cold air, and again, they've got more winter storm conditions for the upper Midwest. They're just going to continue to get it. The northern plains, the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes, and part of the northern Corn Belt is just going to continue to get what we call Alberta clippers. You're going to see these strong winds across a large swath of the area. Then the mountains will be catching that Pacific moisture for winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories. So this is where we're going to be at 500 millibars today, that strong flow, the elongated area of the polar vortex, making the flow more west to east before it turns southeast, and that's where the cold air is going to go. These are the winds aloft coming in around noon today, so you can see them screaming. See these patches that are brownish gray? This is a core where the wind speeds are moving between 170 and 185 miles an hour at 30,000 feet. So a lot of wind aloft coming and running across the Continental Divide. And when you have strong winds like this that are nearly perpendicular to the Continental Divide, this is where the wind gaps get the wind, and you have these very strong gusty winds that will be developing. These are the wind speeds forecasted in terms of wind gusts between now and through tomorrow morning. Now, if you look at these numbers, you see 60s and 50s, but certainly the potential for the winds to gust higher than that, 70 to 80 miles an hour or more, is certainly on the table in the wind-prone areas of the west with this system, especially along and north of Interstate 70, I-80, I-90, I-25. You're just going to have to hold on. Precipitation is going to be looking like this through tomorrow. There's going to be that heavy moisture in the Pacific Northwest, the Northern Rockies, the overrunning snows out in the Dakotas, southern Canada, northeastern Montana. There's going to be some snow shower activity overnight tonight into tomorrow morning in that area there with that slug of Pacific moisture coming through. But if you notice, in the desert Southwest, Southern Plains, Southern Rockies, nothing going on. All the action is being directed up north, and that's what the snowfall is looking like over the next 48 hours. Then we look at the 500 millibar chart for Friday. Doesn't look much different, does it? We have the main jet stream wind continuing to drive very cold air. There's extremely cold air right here. Some minus 40s will be happening later this week in the Northwest Territories. Well, the flow of the air is going to be sending it along and east of the Continental Divide with the high pressure right along the west coast. And this blocking pattern out here in the Pacific is keeping this jet stream from wanting to come down to here. It's going to be more directed here. So that's where the weather is going to be. And by Saturday, look at this contrast. This is where you have to really understand your topography and your terrain. The very cold air, and these are sub-zero temperatures up here, are going to be getting into parts of the Rockies. But the Continental Divide is holding it up. And so what will happen is it's all Pacific air here, very mild. You jump over the divide, it's extremely cold. And in that cold air, that Pacific moisture will be very efficient at producing snowfall. So these are the temperatures by about noon Saturday. You're sub-zero in Montana and the Dakotas. You're in the teens in northeastern Wyoming. You're in the 30s and 40s in southwestern Wyoming. Now, one reason for this, and we harp on this all the time, is if you take a cross-section, let's go from Twin Falls to Winnipeg, and on the left scale here is the feet. Now, this graphic is exaggerated a little bit, but what you have to remember with Arctic air masses is that Arctic air is dense. The coldness of the air makes it more dense. The molecules are packed tight together, and so it's kind of like maple syrup or molasses. It goes to the lowest point of gravity. Arctic air does, just like water does. So to get Arctic air, to get into the higher elevations of the West, Billings, for example, the Arctic air, if it gets this deep in terms of a vertical extent, won't get into here. It won't get into Billings. It will not get over the Yellowstone Plateau and west of the divide. So if we kind of use this as the Continental Divide, Arctic air masses have to get deep enough in terms of elevation to get up into places like Billings, into the Front Range of Wyoming, and into Colorado. So when you have strong Pacific westerly flow pushing against the Continental Divide, and that comes downhill off the mountains, it runs into the Arctic air, and it will push the Arctic air to the east, or if the Arctic air isn't thick enough, it might get up to Bismarck or into eastern Montana, but it can't climb the hill into Billings. So this is the battle. And what happens is you get the northerly flow out here into the plains, the westerly flow from the Pacific. It's just a battle zone. To get really deep Arctic air over the divide, it's got to be deep, and you cannot have strong westerlies on the western slope. And that's exactly what's going on right here. So the coldest of the cold, and it will be plenty cold, will head into the Dakotas and the upper Midwest. When we look at precipitation with the next round, this is where the heavy snow will get parts of the Dakotas and eastern Montana. This is basically going to be happening Thursday, Friday, and into Saturday and Sunday morning. Significant snow in Montana, western North Dakota, northwest South Dakota, even getting maybe, you can see along and north of Interstate 90 here, the extreme northeast counties of Wyoming and the Black Hills could get into the mix. But right here is where the Pacific wins out. And that's where your snowfall going to be heavy late this week and into the beginning of the weekend for Montana. Extreme northeast Wyoming gets clipped, and as you can see, into the western Dakotas. By Wednesday of next week, there's a little bit of a shift, and we have the high pressure ridge a little bit further west. So there may be a push of some colder air along the divide and some moisture right around Wednesday of next week. But we still have this problem up here. It's a log jam. What we have is an omega block. This is by next Monday, Sunday night into Monday. We have this high west of the Aleutians, which would normally send cold air into the western United States. However, the axis of the ridge and this pattern where we called it omega block, see the Greek shape omega right here? This low maintains this high. This high maintains this low. And we also have these lows undercutting the ridge. So what this ends up doing is it directs the colder air more towards the central United States, not the western United States. This omega block pattern has to break down and give away and have the ridge of high pressure instead of here be more towards here. Then you're going to direct the colder air into the west in terms of areas west of the divide. But this omega block is going to go into the weekend and into early next week. Now, once this breaks down, it's game on. But until it maintains itself, the coldest of the cold will be the Dakotas, the upper Midwest, and the Great Lakes. But occasionally, there'll be little ripples coming through that will pull that cold air more to the west. Have yourself a good Tuesday. We'll see you tomorrow.